In the deadly Alaskan winter of 1898, everyone ridiculed the Scottish builder who made his house windows no bigger than the palm of a hand, calling his house a dark dungeon. But when the temperature dropped to 45 degrees below zero, and the neighbors' large, beautiful windows turned into heat-absorbing monsters that forced them to burn their furniture to survive, they realized too late that what they had considered madness was the only lifeline. The stone fortress of a Yukon. The Mad Mason of the Yukon Valley, Alaska, August 1898. While every other prospector and homesteader in the territory was installing the largest windows they could afford to capture the fleeting northern light, Ewan McAllister was doing something that made his neighbors question his sanity. The 39-year-old Scottish stonemason was cutting window openings barely wider than his hand. Narrow slits in walls 2 feet thick that let in just enough light to work by. "He's building a prison," one trapper's wife declared. No civilized family could live in such darkness. But Ewan hadn't crossed an ocean and trekked over the Chilkoot Pass to build what everyone else was building. And if you want to find out what happened when Alaska's brutal winter tested his strange, dark cabin against his neighbors' bright, cheerful homes, read on. Roots in the stone Ewan McAllister had arrived in Alaska in the spring of 1896, just ahead of the Maine gold rush stampede, drawn by the promise of freedom rather than gold. He'd left behind a village on the Isle of Skye where his family had worked stone for 6 generations, building crofts, barns, and cottages designed to withstand North Atlantic gales that would tear apart anything poorly constructed. The cottages of Skye had small windows. Ewan had never questioned this as a child. Glass was expensive, wind was relentless, and heat was precious. A window was a hole in your wall, and holes let warmth escape. The crofters understood this instinctively, building thick stone walls with openings just large enough to admit working light, and nothing more. The illusion of glass America changed his perspective, at least temporarily. His first years in the Pacific Northwest were spent in Seattle, working as a mason on commercial buildings where glass was a symbol of prosperity and progress. Banks wanted enormous windows to display their wealth. Hotels wanted bright lobbies to attract guests. The message was clear. Glass meant civilization, and more glass meant more civilization. When Ewan finally saved enough to claim a tract of timberland near the Yukon River, he initially planned to build an American-style cabin. Wooden walls, generous windows, the kind of home that announced its owner had left the old country behind. He purchased glass panes from a supplier in Skagway, enough for 4 large windows that would flood his cabin with Alaskan sunlight. The first winter's lesson, his first winter, destroyed that notion entirely. The cabin he'd hastily constructed in 1897 was standard for the territory, log walls with moss chinking, a wooden floor raised on piers, and 4 beautiful windows that his wife, Ilara, had hung with curtains brought from Scotland. When December arrived with temperatures of minus 40 degrees, those windows became 4 holes pouring cold directly into their home. Ewan watched frost form on the inside of the glass, while his stove glowed red from constant feeding. He watched his children huddle on the side of the cabin away from the windows, instinctively avoiding the rivers of cold air that cascaded down the glass and pooled on the floor. He watched his woodpile, 8 cords he thought would last until May, dwindle to 4 cords by February. By March, they were burning furniture. By April, Ewan was hauling deadfall from 3 miles away through deep snow, his sled dogs exhausted, his back ruined, and his faith in American building methods shattered completely. The physics of survival that summer. He studied his cabin with a mason's eye. He measured the temperature near the windows versus the temperature near the solid walls. He calculated the surface area of glass versus the surface area of logs. He remembered his grandfather's croft on Skye. Dark, yes, but warm through winters that drove horizontal rain against the walls for weeks at a time. Glass, Ewan realized, was the enemy. Every square foot of window conducted cold 15 times more efficiently than the same area of solid wall. His 4 generous windows, totaling roughly 16 square feet of glass, were bleeding heat equivalent to 240 square feet of log wall. He might as well have left the door open all winter. The cabin couldn't be fixed. The window openings were cut, and the structure was what it was. But Ewan had enough savings now for a proper home. A stone house built the way his grandfather would have built it. Thick walls, small windows, a home designed for survival, not for showing off to neighbors. A home or a tomb. Ilara supported him cautiously. The children need light to read, to learn, she said. They need warmth to live, Ewan replied. Light we can make with candles. Heat costs us 8 cords with winter. Construction began in June 1898 with stone hauled from a riverbed quarry 2 miles south. Ewan worked alone through the summer, splitting and shaping blocks with the precision of 6 generations of training. His walls rose slowly, 2 feet thick, with an inner and outer face of dressed stone and rubble filled between. The kind of walls that had stood for centuries in the highlands. The window openings drew immediate attention. Ewan cut 4 of them, 1 on each wall. But each measured only 8 inches wide and 14 inches tall, barely large enough to admit a raven. He splayed the openings inward, angling the stone so that light would spread once it entered. But the exterior gaps remained narrow slits that seemed more suited to a medieval fortress than a frontier home. The neighbor's mockery, his nearest neighbor, a Swedish prospector named Olaf Henderson, rode over in late July to observe the progress. Henderson had built his own cabin 2 years earlier, with windows shipped at great expense from Seattle, large double-hung sashes that he considered the finest feature of his home. McAllister, were those? Henderson asked, pointing at the narrow openings. Windows, Ewan replied. Henderson laughed, assuming a joke. When Ewan's expression didn't change, the laughter faded. You can't be serious. A man couldn't fit his head through those gaps. How will your wife see to cook? How will your children read? They'll manage. We did on Sky. This isn't Sky. This is America. We have glass here. We have light. Henderson shook his head. Your wife will go mad in that darkness. I've seen it happen. Women on the frontier, losing their minds from isolation. You're building her a tomb. The delegation word spread quickly through the scattered homesteads of the valley. The Scottish mason was building a dungeon, a prison, a home so dark and oppressive that his family would surely suffer. The women of the community organized a delegation to speak with Ilara, hoping to convince her to intervene before construction was complete. Ingrid Henderson led the group, arriving on a bright August afternoon with 3 other wives in tow. They found Ilara in the old cabin mending clothes while her 2 children played outside. Mrs. McAllister were concerned. Ingrid began, Your husband's new home. It isn't suitable. The windows are barely larger than arrow slits. Your children will grow up in darkness. It isn't healthy. It isn't right. Ilara set down her needle. Have you been inside a croft on Sky, Mrs. Henderson? I have not. Then perhaps you shouldn't lecture me on what is and isn't suitable for a Scottish family. Ilara's voice remained pleasant, but her eyes were steel. My grandmother raised 9 children in a cottage with 1 window smaller than your hand. All 9 survived to adulthood. How many children in this valley died of cold last winter? The question hung in the air. 2, in fact. An infant in a cabin near the river, and a toddler whose family had run out of firewood in February. Everyone knew the stories. We only want what's best for you, Ingrid said, gathering her dignity. Then pray for a mild winter, Ilara replied. Because when January comes, my family will be warm in our dark little cottage, while yours shivers beside those beautiful bright windows. The math of heat-loss battle lines were drawn before the first snowflake fell. What Ewan McAllister understood from a lifetime of working with stone and glass, modern building science would later quantify with precision. But the principles he was applying had been proven through centuries of Scottish survival, long before anyone calculated thermal conductivity coefficients. The key was understanding that every material conducts heat at a different rate. Stone conducts heat slowly. Wood conducts it somewhat faster. But glass conducts heat approximately 15 times faster than a solid log wall, and nearly 30 times faster than a well-built stone wall with rubble fill. This means that a single square foot of window loses as much heat as 15 square feet of log wall or 30 square feet of Ewan's 2-foot-thick stone construction. His neighbor's generous windows, typically totaling 20 to 30 square feet of glass per cabin, were hemorrhaging heat equivalent to 300 to 400 square feet of wall surface. They'd essentially removed an entire wall of their homes and replaced it with material that offered almost no resistance to cold. The mathematics were devastating. On a night when exterior temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees and interior temperatures held at 65 degrees, the temperature differential drove heat relentlessly toward the cold side. A square foot of single pane glass would lose approximately 85 British thermal units, BTUs, per hour. 20 square feet of windows meant 1,700 BTUs per hour pouring into the Alaskan night, equivalent to burning nearly half a pound of dry spruce every 60 minutes just to offset window losses. Ewan's tiny windows totaled less than 4 square feet of glass. His heat loss through glazing was approximately 340 BTUs per hour, 1/5 of his neighbor's losses. Over a 16-hour winter night, he saved nearly 22,000 BTUs, equivalent to roughly 6 pounds of firewood. Over a 7-month Alaskan winter, those savings compounded into cords that would never burn, hours of labor never spent, and trees never felled. Convection and comfort, but heat loss wasn't the only problem with large windows. Cold glass created convection currents inside the cabin. Warm air contacted the frigid window surface, cooled rapidly, and sank toward the floor. This created a constant circulation pattern, warm air rising near the stove, traveling across the ceiling, hitting the cold windows, and cascading downward as a river of chill that pulled at floor level where children played and slept. Ewan had felt these currents in his first cabin, watched his children instinctively avoid the window walls. The cold flowed like water, invisible but relentless. His new cabin, with its minimal glass, would eliminate these convection patterns almost entirely. The interior air would stay stratified and stable, warmth accumulating evenly. The splayed interior opening served a purpose beyond aesthetics. By angling the stone inward at roughly 45 degrees, Ewan created a light funnel that spread illumination across a wider interior area. A window 8 inches wide on the exterior became nearly 2 feet wide at the interior face, bouncing light off angled stone surfaces. His neighbor saw darkness and assumed misery. Ewan saw efficiency and understood comfort. The test begins the stonework took 3 months. By September, the structure stood complete, a squat rectangle of gray river stone that looked more like a fortification than a home. The windows received special attention. Ewan had purchased the smallest panes available, 8 by 4 inch single thickness, set deep within the splayed openings. He mortared them in place with care, sealing every edge against drafts. The interior splays transformed the narrow openings into something almost graceful. Alara admitted surprise when she first stepped inside. The space was dim compared to their old cabin, certainly, but not the pitch-black dungeon the neighbors had predicted. The roof was sawed over timber beams, another old country technique that added insulation. Moving day came in late October. The first fire in the new central hearth revealed the chimney drew perfectly. Within an hour, the interior walls felt warm to the touch. Within 2 hours, the family had shed their wool layers. That night, Ewan let the fire die to embers. At midnight, he checked the interior temperature, 61 degrees, 8 hours after the fire had peaked. He checked again at dawn, 54 degrees, with only coals remaining. He smiled. The small windows weren't a sacrifice. They were a gift. The wager by November, the McAllister cabin had become a cautionary tale told across the Yukon Valley. Men gathered at the trading post and shook their heads at the foolishness of building a home no better than a cave. Olaf Henderson took particular interest in documenting his neighbor's mistakes, riding past the property twice weekly. He bet a smoked ham that the McAllister family would abandon their cave before Christmas. A passing fur trader added 50 cents to the pool, betting the Scottish woman would leave her husband entirely before spring. Then January 1899 arrived with ferocity that veteran sourdoughs said they'd never witnessed. A blizzard on the 3rd dropped 2 feet of snow and drove temperatures to minus 45 degrees. The wind didn't stop for 6 days. When it finally ended, the valley began counting its losses. The Henderson farm lost livestock frozen in the fields. A bachelor prospector was found dead in his cabin, his fire cold, his woodpile exhausted. The breaking point Olaf Henderson's beautiful windows became his family's torment. The glass frosted over completely by the 2nd day, blocking even the light they were meant to provide. Behind that frost, the cold radiated inward with relentless efficiency. Ingrid hung quilts over the windows, but nothing could stop the chill. The Henderson children slept in the center of the cabin, piled under every blanket they possessed. Olaf fed the stove continuously, every hour during the worst of the cold. His woodpile shrank with terrifying speed. By January 15th, he was rationing. By January 20th, he was burning fence rails. By January 25th, he was eyeing the furniture Ingrid had shipped from Stockholm. The chairs burned on January 27th. The cabin stayed above 40 degrees barely, while outside the temperature touched minus 50 degrees. At the McAllister cabin, January passed with normalcy. Ewan built his morning fire and let it burn hot for 3 hours. The stone walls absorbed the heat. By noon, he let the flames die. By midnight, the cabin held at 54 degrees. He never woke to feed the fire. He never burned furniture. The tiny windows proved their worth daily. Surrender and sanctuary on February 2nd, Olaf Henderson appeared at the McAllister door. His face was gaunt, his pride visibly broken. Behind him, a sled carried his wife and children wrapped in every remaining blanket. "We have no more wood," Olaf whispered. "No more furniture to burn. The children—" Ewan opened the door wider. "Bring them inside." The Henderson family stumbled into the McAllister cabin and stopped, disoriented by the warmth. Ingrid, who had organized delegations against his tomb, stood in the center of the dim room and wept. "It's so warm," she managed. "How is it so warm?" Ewan gestured at the walls, the floor, the tiny windows. "Small windows," he said simply. "Big heat." The Henderson family stayed for 9 days. During that time, Ewan conducted measurements. He borrowed a thermometer and recorded readings. The McAllister cabin held between 52 degrees and 64 degrees. For comparison, he took readings at the empty Henderson cabin. With no fire, it had dropped to 20 degrees below freezing. The area within 3 feet of the windows registered temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin. "The glass," Ewan explained to Olaf, "loses heat like a hole in the wall. You have 24 square feet of windows. That's like having a door wide open all winter. But the light," Olaf stammered, "the light costs you 4 extra cords of wood every winter. My windows total 3 square feet. I lose 1/8 what you lose. That's why I still have wood, and you're burning chairs." The retrofit spring came late to the Yukon that year. As soon as the ground thawed, Olaf Henderson appeared at Ewan's door, hat in hand. "I need to learn," he said, "how to fix what I built." Ewan could have refused, but instead, he reached for his coat. "Show me your cabin. We'll see what can be done." They boarded up 4 of the 6 windows, packing the cavities with sawdust for insulation. They kept only the south-facing pair. The interior was darker, but Ingrid said nothing. She understood the trade now. The legacy of the stone house by autumn of 1899, 11 families in the valley had reduced their window area. Some built entirely new structures, using Ewan's principles. The McAllister cabin stood until 1952, when Ewan's great-grandson finally demolished it to build a modern house. Before the demolition, the family photographed the cabin. The walls were still plumb, the stonework sound. A local historian found the interior temperature holding at 48 degrees on a January afternoon, with no fire burning. Modern building science calls it the window-to-wall ratio. Contemporary energy code in Alaska limit glazing to specific percentages, recognizing what Ewan McAllister learned through bitter experience. Windows are thermal liabilities. Even the best modern triple-pane windows conduct heat faster than insulated walls. Ewan optimized for survival. He accepted darkness as the price of warmth. And because of him, families stayed warm through the next winter and the next. The windows don't care about pride. They just conduct heat, steady and relentless, whether you understand the physics or not.